I left my family at 18 because of my sister. 16 years later, I learned the real reason. My mother called me for the first time in 4 years last Tuesday. Not to apologize, not to ask how I was doing. She called because she found out, through a cousin, not from me, that I just made partner at my firm. And suddenly, after 4 years of nothing, she needed to see me. "It's a family emergency," she said. "You need to come home." I almost didn't pick up. I want you to understand that before I tell you anything else. I almost let it go to voicemail like I have every single time for the last 4 years. But something made me answer. Maybe I wanted to hear what kind of emergency finally made me worth calling. I'm going to back up, though, because none of this makes sense unless you understand what it was like growing up as the son my parents never really wanted. In the same house, as the daughter they couldn't stop giving things to. My name doesn't matter for this story, so let's just say I'm Ethan. I'm 34. I grew up in a small town outside Columbus, Ohio, with my parents, Richard and Diane, and my younger sister, Melissa, who's 2 years behind me. From as far back as I can remember, Melissa got the good version of everything, and I got whatever was left over, if there was anything left over at all. I don't mean that in a "my sister got a slightly nicer bike" way. I mean it structurally, like it was the operating system of our house. Every birthday, every Christmas, every just because, it went to her first and it went to her bigger. When I was 10, I wanted a telescope for Christmas. I'd been asking for months. I unwrapped a $15 model rocket kit. Melissa, who never once mentioned wanting one, unwrapped an actual telescope. My mother told me, laughing, well, she just seemed like she'd get more use out of it. Melissa was 8. She used it twice. When I made varsity as a sophomore, nobody came to my first game. My dad had to work late. My mom had a headache. 2 weeks later, Melissa got picked for a dance recital, a group number, not even a lead. And both of them were there in the front row with a bouquet of flowers the size of a toddler. I used to keep score. I'm not proud of that, but I did. I had a mental ledger of every time it happened, because some part of 8-year-old me thought that if I just collected enough evidence, eventually somebody would look at it and go, "Oh my God. You're right, this isn't fair," and things would change. They never did. The thing that really broke something in me, though, happened when I was 17. I'd been saving for 2 years, mowing lawns, working at a grocery store. Doing anything I could, because I wanted a car for my senior year so I could drive myself to my part-time job instead of relying on my mom, who forgot to pick me up more times than I can count. I had almost $3,000 saved in an envelope in my sock drawer. My parents knew about it. I'd talked about it at dinner more times than I probably should have, excited, telling them my plan. One day I came home from school, and the envelope was gone. I asked my mom about it, and she got this look on her face, not guilty, just tired, like I was the one being unreasonable, and she said, "Melissa needed it for her dance competition fees and the costume. You're 17, Ethan, you don't need a car that badly. We'll pay you back." They never paid me back, not $1 of it. I want to be clear, this wasn't a "we're a poor family and had to make hard choices" situation. My dad had a stable job as a plant supervisor. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. This was a choice. Every single time it was a choice, and the choice was always her. By the time I turned 18, I had one goal: get out. I'd gotten into a state school 2 hours away with a partial scholarship, and I took every shift I could find that summer to cover the rest. My parents didn't offer to help with tuition, books, or a dorm deposit. Meanwhile, that same summer, Melissa, who was 16, got a car. A used Honda Civic, but a real, actual car bought outright, with a giant bow on it in the driveway like something out of a commercial. I watched from the porch. Nobody even pretended to explain that one to me. The week before I left for school, my mom sat me down and said something I've never forgotten. She said, "I hope you know we love you both the same. We just show it differently." I didn't say anything back. I just nodded because I'd learned by then that arguing never changed the outcome, it just extended the conversation. I left for college that August, and I made a decision in the car on the drive there. I wasn't going to keep score anymore, and I wasn't going to keep showing up somewhere I wasn't valued. I called on major holidays out of some leftover sense of duty. I didn't visit. I built a life 2 hours and eventually a lot more than 2 hours away. For a while, that was almost enough distance to stop thinking about it. Almost. Here's where it gets complicated, because I didn't cut them off in one clean break. It was more like a slow bleed over 16 years. I'd show up for a Christmas here and there out of guilt. I went to Melissa's college graduation. I even went to her wedding 4 years ago, stood in the back, gave a gift, left before the reception ended. My parents and I existed in this strange, hollow orbit, technically family, practically strangers. The full cutoff happened 4 years ago, and it wasn't even really about me. It was about my grandmother, my dad's mother, Grandma Joan, the one person in that entire family who ever made me feel like I wasn't invisible. She was dying, and I flew back to see her in the hospital. My parents were there too, and at one point in the hallway, my mother pulled me aside and asked, while my grandmother was actively dying 2 doors down, whether I'd be willing to step back from any inheritance discussions. Because Melissa could really use the help with a house down payment. My grandmother passed 4 days later. At the reading of the will, I found out my parents had already been quietly pressuring her for over a year to leave the majority of her estate to Melissa. Since Ethan's doing fine on his own, my grandmother, to her credit, split it evenly. But finding out my own parents had spent her final year on Earth lobbying to cut me out of her memory too, that was the moment I stopped answering their calls. I told them calmly in a 2-line text, "I need space. Please don't contact me unless it's an emergency." Then I blocked both their numbers and only kept my mother's on a separate line, muted, in case something actually happened. For 4 years, nothing did, until last Tuesday. I unblocked her number about 6 months ago, actually. Not to reconnect, just because I'd read something about not wanting to regret not being reachable if something really did happen to one of them. I never expected her to actually use it. When she called, her voice had this urgency I hadn't heard from her in years, not warmth, urgency. "It's your father," she said. "He's not doing well. We really need to talk, all of us. Can you come this weekend?" I want to be honest with you. Some small, dumb, hopeful part of me still lit up a little. Like 16 years later, maybe this was it. Maybe something had actually shifted. I drove up that Saturday. My wife, Rachel, offered to come with me, but I told her I needed to do this alone. I want to tell you that was a mistake, but honestly, I think I needed to hear whatever was coming without anyone watching my face while I heard it. When I got there, my dad looked fine. Tired, a little older, but fine. Not emergency fine, just regular fine. Melissa was there too, sitting stiffly on the couch, which surprised me, because Melissa and I hadn't spoken in almost as long as I hadn't spoken to my parents. She gave me this tight, uncomfortable smile like she also wasn't sure why she'd been summoned. My mother got straight to it once we were all sitting down. My dad, it turned out, wasn't sick. He'd had some chest pains a month ago that turned out to be anxiety, not a heart attack, which they'd apparently known for weeks. The real emergency was that they were 3 months behind on the mortgage. My dad had been quietly let go from his supervisor position over a year ago and hadn't told anyone, living off savings and credit cards until both ran dry. They were about to lose the house. And then my mother looked at me and said the words I don't think I'll ever fully get out of my head. "We know you're doing well now. We were hoping you could co-sign a loan to help us catch up. Just until your father finds something new." I sat there for a second, just absorbing it. 4 years of silence. 16 years of being told, one way or another, that I was less important, less deserving, less loved. And the first real conversation we'd had in half a decade was a request for money. I asked why they were asking me and not Melissa, since she'd apparently always been the one they trusted with everything. My mother's face did something I'd never seen before, this flicker of something between guilt and panic. And she said, "Melissa has her own situation right now," and wouldn't elaborate. That's when Melissa, who'd been dead silent this whole time, finally spoke. She said, quiet and a little shaky, "Just tell him, Mom. Or I will." What came out over the next 20 minutes is the part of this story I still have trouble saying out loud, so bear with me. My mother had gotten pregnant with Melissa during a period when she and my dad had briefly separated, a separation none of us kids ever knew had happened. Because they got back together before I was old enough to remember it. Melissa was not my father's biological daughter. She was the result of an affair my mother had during those few months apart. My father found out when Melissa was around too, from a paternity test he took quietly on his own after doubts had been eating at him. He never told my mother he knew. Not until this year, when, under the financial stress, under everything falling apart, it finally came out in a screaming fight in front of Melissa, who up until that moment had no idea either. My father had known, silently, for 30 years. And instead of leaving or confronting my mother or doing literally anything else, he stayed, and my mother. Riddled with guilt for the affair and terrified he'd eventually resent the child born from it, spent 3 decades overcorrecting. Every gift, every dollar, every moment of attention that went to Melissa instead of me wasn't really about Melissa being favored for who she was. It was my mother trying to buy back a debt she owed my father, using currency that was supposed to be mine. I was the actual biological son. And I got treated like an afterthought my entire childhood, because my mother was terrified that if she ever treated Melissa like anything less than perfect, my father would finally leave, 30 years after the fact, over something that happened before I could even walk. Melissa found out the same day I did. She looked shattered, and honestly in that moment some old, hardened part of me almost felt sorry for her. She'd spent her whole life as the favorite, and it turned out she was never actually favored for anything real. She was collateral in a marriage held together by guilt and silence. I asked my father point blank why he never said anything, why he let this play out for 3 decades on my back. He couldn't even look at me. He said, I didn't know how to fix it without blowing everything up. I told him he hadn't fixed anything. He'd just let it happen slowly enough that nobody had to take responsibility for it in real time. I left that house without agreeing to co-sign anything. I told them I needed time, which was true, but honestly, in that moment I already knew what my answer was going to be. Over the next few weeks, the fallout spread through the rest of the family fast. Melissa told our aunt, who told our grandmother on my mother's side, who was, frankly, furious on my behalf, in a way nobody in that family had ever been before. Relatives who used to gently joke about how Melissa was always the special one started calling me, almost sheepishly, saying things like, "We always wondered why things were so uneven." We just never knew why. My parents lost the house 2 months later. Not because I refused to help, plenty of family members offered, in various half-hearted, guilt-driven ways, but because my mother, in the wreckage of the affair coming out, finally admitted to my father in front of everyone that she'd also hidden a second, smaller affair years later, one my father hadn't known about. That was the breaking point. He couldn't overcorrect his way through. He moved out. They're separated again, this time for real, this time publicly, in front of the entire extended family that used to think they were the model couple. My mother reached out to me one more time after that, not to apologize, but to ask if I could at least help her with a security deposit on an apartment, since family is family. I told her calmly, the way I'd learned to say things to her over 16 years of practice, that I hoped she'd be okay, and that I loved her enough to be honest. I wasn't going to be her financial safety net, after being treated like I didn't matter for 30 years. I haven't heard from her since. Though Melissa actually reached out, for the first time as an adult without our parents in the middle of it. She apologized, not for anything she'd done on purpose, because she genuinely hadn't known, but for never questioning it, for just accepting the favoritism as normal because it benefited her. We've talked more in the last 3 months than we did in the 15 years before that. It's not perfect. There's a lot of unlearning on both sides. But for the first time, it feels like an actual relationship instead of a comparison exercise our parents ran for 3 decades. Update, 3 months later. My dad reached out last week. Not to apologize either, really just to check in, which after everything felt almost funny in a bleak kind of way. He's renting a small place across town. My mom moved in with her sister 2 states over. The house sold at a loss to cover what they still owed. Melissa and I had dinner with our spouses last weekend, the first time either of our partners had really spent time together outside of a stiff holiday dinner. Rachel told me afterward that watching Melissa and me actually laugh about something stupid from our childhood, something that had nothing to do with either of our parents, felt like watching 2 people meet each other for the first time. I'm not going to pretend this has some clean, tidy bow on it. My parents are going to spend a long time, maybe the rest of their lives, dealing with what 30 years of silence and guilt cost them. I'm not interested in being the instrument of their punishment, and I'm also not interested in pretending none of it happened so everyone can feel more comfortable. What I do know is this. I spent my whole childhood thinking there was something wrong with me, like I just wasn't likable enough, wasn't good enough, wasn't worth the same effort. Turns out I had it backwards the entire time. It was never about me at all. It never is with people like that. It's just never worth 30 years of a kid's childhood to find that out.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story and want more fascinating Reddit tales, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to Archives of Reddit. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new upload. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.